As news of Starbucks, Google, and other multinational corporations' purported tax avoidance hit the headlines in Europe, regulators struggled to effectively respond to the public outcry. That is, till now. The regulatory antidote to the hysteria has been created by the OECD and trickled down to the country level. Now, here to tell us about what the regional and local impact will be, Magnus Johnsson. Magnus, first, can you tell me about what spurred on the OECD's 15-point action plan?
I think the backdrop would be, as you referred to in your introduction, is the fair share of taxes debate we have seen over the last, call it 3 to 4 years. This is not a regulatory debate. This is a morality debate around where the corporates pay their taxes and how much they pay in taxes.
So why now are these concerns really leading to action, considering that MNCs have been operating all over the world by nature of being MNCs from time immemorial?
It's a good question. I think one of the aspects is obviously the consequences of the financial crisis. Territories, countries, they would like to safeguard their tax bases. They need the money. I think there is a slightly bigger question here is also to look at the international tax system. And I think it's pretty clear that it's out of date. There needs some reforms on the international tax system as a whole. I think there is a third aspect, and that is that we have seen a number of different stakeholders taking part in this debate, which we may not have seen in the same way before. Stakeholders being governments and tax authorities, obviously, corporates, but also the public, NGOs, and so on. So I think it's a combination of these three which have put these issues on the table at the moment.
So the manifestation, of course, of these grievances has really been this action plan, yes?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that part of this is then that the G20, when they saw the entire discussion after the financial crisis, they commissioned OECD to put together an action plan in order to address these issues. So they have done. OECD, they come up with their action plan in 2013, and the final reports will come out later on this year. The main objectives of this is twofold. One is to ensure that corporates are paying taxes in the countries where they conduct their businesses. The second one is to prevent double non-taxation. So those aspects of taxes and call it the discrepancies between different tax systems is what you want to achieve with the OECD action plan.
So do you welcome these changes?
I think they are inevitable. You have to remember that the changes and the proposed changes are potentially the biggest changes that we will see in the international tax systems for decades. It's definitely the biggest changes that I will ever see in my career. So it's all about to take a fundamental look at how the international tax system works. So yes, I think it's absolutely necessary. You have to remember that the foundation of the current double tax treaties and model treaties goes back to the 1970s. Quite a lot has happened since then when it comes to business and the global business and global economy. I think the other aspect of this is there is a need of behavioral changes as well. And I think that the companies and corporations out there, they are starting to adopt to an environment where tax is not only a cost but also an obligation. So there are two aspects here, the behavioral aspect and regulatory aspect. And these two has to go in balance. You have to balance those going forward.
How would you conceive of a program that is mutually beneficial for all parties involved and still have the right regulatory elements included? Do you think that these proposed changes, for instance, go far enough to meeting all of those demands?
It's a boring answer, but we have to wait and see a little bit. We need to see the final outcomes coming, as I said, later on this year. I think from a corporate perspective, what they need and what they have to adopt to, they need certainty and they want to have predictability. So of course, if we have a period of time where there are uncertainties and unpredictabilities, they don't like that. When we see what the final outcome would be, I'm sure they will adopt. I think it's more difficult for them to really think about the fact that they also have to think about the reputation. So the behavioral aspect is potentially more difficult for them to adopt to compared to the regulatory changes.
And let's talk about the behavior and experience of international investors, right? We know that in Sweden, in particular, some investors have expressed frustration over growing unease about how these changes are going to come into play. So from an international perspective, do you think that Sweden's curb appeal as a place to invest in, as well as Europe as a continent, is going to be in any way diminished?
If we look at Sweden, I think we have had a a history in Sweden of quite a lot of regulations coming through over the last couple of years. And some of them have been questioned. I think in Sweden we have a situation where potentially we are looking for a bigger tax reform going forward when it comes to the corporate taxation. The other aspect in Sweden is that we have seen the tax authorities being increasingly aggressive towards corporates in certain industries. This is something where we have seen international investors asking questions, what's happening in Sweden. It's always been a high tax country, but it's always been a very predictable country. And I think that maybe international investors are looking at this and asking what's happening.